We shot this on Super 16, which is celluloid, which is a medium that's not really, it's considered by many to be obsolete, but I think that's wrong. I think it's actually a very painterly medium. It's a very, it's an artist's medium. It's a medium of color. It's a medium of texture and so forth. But to answer back to the question, I used a fairly expensive means of shooting this film, very inexpensively. And the way we did that was by being very resourceful, doing a lot of things ourselves, paying people very little, simply because they're friends and they wanted to be involved. The thing is, I self-financed this film, which for me, the lesson in self-financing your film, especially in Canada, I'm from Canada, which is a very different set of circumstances from a business standpoint than it is in the USA. But when you self-finance a film, you're not working with other partners in terms of whether creative or business partners and so forth, is that nobody ever picks up the phone for you when it's your reputation, it's your work, and it's your house that you've put on the line. So that's the one thing I think is very important here is with filmmakers. It is a great sacrifice. It's a sacrifice of time. It's a sacrifice of energy. It's a sacrifice of motion. The whole process has this really heavy doubt hanging over your head because you have to keep going the longer you get into it. No, I did it because I had to, because it's something I'd rather be sorry about that? No, this is strictly motivated by the need for self-fulfillment. And it's a fulfillment that I hope can be contagious and other people can be fulfilled by. But back to his question, I think what it is, when you do a project like this, an independent project, the worst thing is to be 98% done. And the deeper you get into it, the harder it is to stop. And that's one thing, we were talking about things like budgets and money and so forth. You get in so deep that you can only go forward. And that's something that, at the end of the day, it is kind of inspiring and it's a challenge. And it's something that's it's the great sort of emotional motivation for creating and completing. And ultimately, at the end, bringing it all together. You know, a film like this, just to move on, and I kind of said this last... Sorry, can I just finish one thing, Louise? This project here is not mine. This project belongs to the actors as well. To Sergio, who's our projectionist tonight, did a fantastic job with lighting. He's a theater man, and he came into this project, and it's as much his as it is mine. But the whole point I'm trying to say is that this project is it's almost like a very collaborative effort, and it came out of a certain sort of chaos, and it came together. And budget was part of that chaos, because you never know, you can only film with as much money as you have in your pocket. And I mean, 90,000 is really pays for catering on most big productions. And we made, a whole separate experience, film experience out of this. But yeah, a roundabout way of saying what you're asking. Sorry, Louise.
So two things. You talked about the medium that you used.
Uh-huh.
Did you say celluloid?
Well, it's celluloid. It's physical. Because now
That was the expense. The film type that you chose gives more grain.
well, it gives more. It's a richness, right? I mean, when you... Well, no, yeah, exactly. I think, I spent, of that 90,000, maybe 50,000 of it went into shooting on film and all the costs, the processing, because it's a physical medium. And then doing that, I had to sort of starve my actors. I had to starve my crew. So everybody made that sacrifice, but it was worth it. You know what I mean? Uh-huh.
Do you mean like you alone decide, like you're the one that would write out the grant application, and you would do...
There's no free money. There's no free money for filmmaking. It's, yeah. Oh, at the end, yeah. Well, that's in Canada. They've got a tax credit program, kind of what they used to have in Michigan, I think, up until recently. But that's something that's never guaranteed. After the fact, once it goes into the hands of Canada Revenue, they look at this like from the standpoint, they'll try to find every reason not to give you money back that you're entitled to. And that's part of your financing. But it's self-financed, exactly. Whatever was... Well, because what it is when you have producers, executive producers, co-producers, people putting them onto a film, they all have a stake in its success. But when you're on your own, it's like when I went to the festival in Rotterdam, which is a big deal. And I showed up there, and they said, oh, how did this guy get in on his own? And you show up there, and you realize you're kind of like naked in the wilderness. Nobody knows who you are, who's lobbying on your behalf, and who's, So it's a bit... You don't have any sort of entourage to make sure that, okay, people are going to want to see you succeed. Sorry, Dean? Yeah, you're talking about specific influences as far as filmmakers. Well, I think there's some sort of fairly formalistic influences. I mean, I like a lot of early German cinema, but of course they worked in black and white, and then I brought in color elements. Elements of Jean Cocteau I wanted to bring in. I like the idea of realism and fantasy being sort of indistinguishable. Uh, Kenneth Anger, to some respect, I like his playfulness. I think but it's also the influence of just reclaiming cinema as something, as a visual form that involves the viewer's intuition and emotion and a bit of abstract understanding, putting things together. Because for me, when you write a film and you make a film, I have to keep it interesting for myself, but after a while I have to remind myself that I'm not working in a vacuum and that there are audiences, so I give the audience some credit to be able to engage along with me. And I think there's a number of people here who came a second time to see this, and it's a third time for some people, and in some cases even more than that. And everybody tells me the second time they see the film, it's very simple, it's a clean story. Of course, the weave is a little sort of tricky at first, but it's, as far as the influences, yeah, I would say those are some of the more general ones. People see people like Guy Madden, David Lynch, and so forth, but I can't say that's something that factored into it. Another influence that did come in, and some people have picked up on, is Stanley Kubrick in a film like 2001. Yeah, which is something for me, I did kind of a poor man's version of that. And that's something as well that, you know, it kind of, for me, it's significant. But yeah, as far as some of the general influences, that's certainly where we're at with that. Sure.
Because you wrote this as well.
Yes.
As I'm watching it for a second time, I was kind of wondering, and I'm asking this question because these are just no bad questions.
Yeah, no, that's every question's valid.
The character was definitely spoken played.
Uh-huh.
Marjorie, why was it important to her character to be so blank and so vacuous? Like blank at the point when they came out of the woods and her friends said, like, where were you? And she said, like, where and when.
Uh-huh.
Why was it important to her character in you writing it that she be so blank?
Well, it's not, she's supposed to be a sort of a displaced person, and I think a displaced person, not supernaturally, like the film plays with that concept of her having these extraordinary origins.
And she has that sense in that sort of blankness, like, what am I doing?
Well, there's an otherworldliness about her, but I think I mean I'm not a 19-year-old girl. I've never been. I mean, as long as I can remember, anyways, right? But I think what's important is the fact that I think a lot of it has to do with a young person coming of age, getting a sense of identity, getting a sense of their sexual awakening, coming to terms with who they are, where they come from, and how they belong. Because I'm sure with young people, it happened to me, there's always a crisis of being integrated into the world around you. You think that you're... Well, that's the thing is because her father has, you know, there's a bit of a connection there as being the only person she's ever had any sort of record of intimacy with. I don't mean, you know, in a sordid way, but I mean in an actual substantial. That's why the film, she's constantly surrounded by crude, vulgar people, you know, I'm not to be offensive to the actors, but people who are a lot more base than she is. So it's a contrast. And that's something that, but for her, she is a bit of a work in progress, a blank canvas. And that's something, and her reactions are a bit, maybe, reflect that. Anything?
Anyone else? Questions?
Oh, sorry, we got one here, sir. Okay. Yeah, I'm just going to repeat your question. She asked me shooting on film if I ever had, like with budgeting and had to sort of compromise on, yeah, of course. There's always, I mean, the film is probably a near fulfillment of my vision, and it's only near fulfillment because it's a function of depleted energy, depleted time, depleted resources, money, and of course, I mean, it's the sort of thing that, yeah, I would definitely have done many things different and more extensive. And but that's part of the compromise. That's of the process. You have to know when to stop. Thanks. Yeah, it's just something. It is a sort of a product of limitations, and I think that's what happens is when you have a very Spartan, strict sort of box within which to work. But I like those challenges. As I hope to continue working, I don't want to be, I don't want to be, I still want to be efficient, lean. I don't want to be wasteful. I don't want to be overly indulgent. And I think that's just going to be my style of working. And I think it's, from a business standpoint, it's going to be good. And then from a standpoint of clarity of vision and knowing what you want and getting it, it's all great, good school when you don't have much to work with.
You had a comment?
Yeah, no, there's other places you can go to for action. I mean, it's
Any other question?
Hi, Paul. Thanks, Paul. Yeah. Uh-huh. Yeah, I think, you work as an outsider strictly because you do it on your own terms. And one thing is, I tell some people have issues with the film because I think it could have been a little more, a little less obscure, a little less, opaque and whatnot. But I told them, you don't make films by consensus. You know what I mean? I don't bring all you in. Okay, raise your hand if we should turn left here or we should turn right with the story. And that's the sort of thing. There's a price to pay for that. From a commercial standpoint, because generally, film, as you talk about it, as far as the conventional commercial film industry, what you'll see at the Landmark or the AMC and whatnot, those are films effectively are made based on market research. They're not the sort of they're not controlled by sort of a singular vision in most cases. I mean, you got a guy like Terrence Malick who did The Tree of Life. And recently, he's the guy they respected enough, and effectively he made the sort of film I made, but for a multiplex. And it didn't go over well, but the people involved with it wanted to do that because it's a matter of saving the whole concept of cinema, as opposed to a movie product. But within the community, back to your question, just to be sort of tight about this. Yeah, you can't. I'm 43. I can't be too concerned with being popular when I do something amongst my peers, but I'm very popular with the people who are working with me, and they're popular with me. And as I go forward, I like having these people around me, and we work together. I mean, that's the sort of thing. It's just a matter, you got to put yourself, even putting myself up here, you put yourself up for judgment, right? I don't even expect everybody stayed might have thoroughly been satisfied by the film. But I'm here to defend myself, almost like in a thesis sort of way. This is how I feel, this is what I think. But that's something you have to do. Sure.
I don't know if you're an artist in other mediums in your life, but imagine that when somebody paints something,
Mm-hmm.
it's an example of where you don't ask people's ideas
Uh-huh.
while you're painting it. If the item doesn't sell, it doesn't sell, but you haven't sunk in $100,000 of your own money into it, and so it's not as big a risk. Do you know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, the drive is this. It's all a long-term investment. You think, like the other day on the radio, I told someone, there's no point in making a second film unless you have an intention to make a third film, and you can't make a second film unless you made a first film. It's a long-term. Exactly. And for me, it's an expensive, but it's a deep investment on my part that hopefully the burden will come off of my shoulder as I continue working. But you have to, and I think the challenge is to kind of complete your body of work before your personal end credits come up, and your life goes black, and that's. Yeah, but. But you know what? That doesn't work anymore. Even if you see what gets put out in the theaters anymore, things come and go within one weekend, and these are things that. These are films that still make, people laugh and cry, but nobody, things have changed. I mean, you can only, dress a hamburger so many ways, right? And it's still at the end of the day. And I'm just trying to do something a little more, different or a little more satisfying for myself.
So that leads me. So on a purely pragmatic point, I guess I'll ask you to clarify for people. You say that there's a difference between filmmaking in Canada and filmmaking in the U.S. And the second part of that question would be, how does someone of independent means, Otto's, I know him, but he's obviously not a wealthy man. He's only collecting a nominal fee for doing the screening. Like in this changing age, how does someone who is willing to sink that kind of money in those drastically different environments even hope to recoup that money through what system? I'm sure, for people who might be thinking about doing this on their own, what system is in place, or what hope does one even have of recouping these costs or moving forward?
Well, I think with recouping costs, it's a matter of you have to have a business model where, like as in Canada, there's a tax credit program which you recoup some based on labor. Broadcast, if you're fortunate enough to sell your film for broadcast, brings something in, but even that's getting lower and lower. DVDs don't exist anymore effectively. I mean, nothing hurts me more than when you go to a Kroger or a Zehrs in Canada and you see 3 films for $10. Is this all my work that's come to? So even that venue's not good. And the internet, the proliferation of music and film on the internet has just destroyed any means of sort of controlling any revenue associated with that. So I think what it is you end up having to do things like this, working, and eventually sort of solicit some patronage. And then ultimately you get to a point where, okay, the public at large might take notice, and for whatever's available in terms of theatrical, then at that point in time, hopefully you can get some returns there. And then there's foreign sales and things like that. But it's a fast-changing sort of place out there for filmmakers, and it's becoming really difficult, demoralizing. And at the end of the day, you're going to do it for one reason or another. You're going to do it for the sake of art or culture or commerce. And if you're going to do it for the sake of commerce, you've got some pretty big industrial sort of like entertainment industry that you're up against that you've got no chance of even breaking into their world. So I might as well do it on artistic terms, and I succeed. And if I go, if I can actually continue that practice, and I'm okay with that. I mean, I'll be sensible in terms of how much of my, I can only cut off so many arms and legs to finance the next film before I can't do anything, right? So. Yeah, they're actually, it's funny you mention that because this is an in-between film. I want to be a little shameless about it, but I have copies of my first film for sale if anybody's curious to where I'm coming from after the show. But this is my second film. This is an in-between film. There's actually a suite of 3 films that are based upon Detroit, 3 narratives. They're fictional, very different about my experience growing up in this area as a Canadian coming over here. And those are in development. One's ready to go the minute, I clean some of the business up on this one, and I involve myself with some people who can help it happen. But I will tell you one thing about the new projects, without divulging too much, is that they will be a little more towards what she was asking. They will involve the audience on less rigorous terms a bit, because this for me has been an intellectual workout that I don't need to repeat for myself, right? And I don't know if the audience, for some people it might always be a first time and a new time, but I don't need to go through this anymore again. So I'd rather do something that's maybe a little less, that's going to be a little less intimidating for people, but still rich, still emotionally, intellectually, philosophically, and maybe even sort of with terms of character and humor. It's a direction that's evolution, right? Oh yeah, no, their themes or ideas. One is about based upon music, popular culture through the 70s and 80s here, a young person caught up in that world. The other one is about it's about a bar that is populated by people and ghosts, and where the whole sort of a lot of fates converge. And it's a very sympathetic film. It's called Lucky Pierre's Friendship Club. And that's something as well. And there's another film that I'm working on which is based on car culture called We Are 138, which is based upon that book, or the 138 square miles of that Detroit is. And so yeah, there are little themes. One of them, the music one, is ready to start as soon as I take care of some loose ends with this project. And yeah, I mean, they're going to go, and they're going to be hopefully a step in a different direction, an interesting direction for me.
Question?
Sure.
Regarding the issue of the word nostalgia, if you might consider something
Uh-huh. Hmm. Well, a lot of this film, I mean, it's funny, talking at the festivals about this film, a lot of ideas come out. And it's nostalgia for understanding origins and lineage and the concept of immortality through your descendants, if that makes sense. The girl is effectively an incarnation of the father who never maybe was able to bear a child because the wife passed on when he was younger and so forth. And his lineage, it's like almost like the echoes of your children are echoes of you. The film has a lot of that sort of concept. And the nostalgia is to always, that's why the title, Primordial Ties. I mean, your connections are infinitely not backward, but in reverse. And that's something that people tend to forget, that we are just effectively variations on our predecessors, genetic variations, emotional characters, physically, you know what I mean, in that way. I think the nostalgia is inevitable, especially as you move later in life and maybe closer to, you know, the end. You think, okay, where's this all, and where do we go, and why? How do my children relate to this whole cosmic sort of weave? So that's, I mean, in terms of nostalgia, I mean, there is a bit of that. Oh no, that look, because I had to situate the film in a timeless era. I had to situate the film stylistically in the past, abstractly in the past, so that even when they see this in 20 years, it'll still look, it's part of the past. That's important, because the past is sort of, and that's why film is nice, as opposed to video, because film immediately has the quality of memory. It's like when people see old Super 8 footage of some kids running in the yard, immediately they get nostalgic. Oh, it's sentimental. And that's why I wanted to have a bit of that sentimentality and distance with the look of the film. It looks like it's in the 70s or 80s or something like that. And like you said, I think yesterday, you said it looked like an old Clairol commercial, which was fantastic, right? Yeah, no, for me, that's exactly what I wanted with the lighting and manipulating and the style, because it's evocative. For those of us who are old enough, it reminds us of not a sweeter time, but a fascinating, yeah, it's on almost in some respects ghostly. It's distant, and then, you know, in that respect, yeah. Sure. Yeah. Yeah, but see, that's great. I had no intention. I've never read Ulysses, but I mean, yeah. But you know, that whole concept of bodies of water and transitions over bodies of water, symbolic, yeah. But I think one thing I will just divulge, because it won't go too much longer, is that the film ties together many different parallel concepts of human origins. That I'm not a scholar, but if you look at a lot of like sort of Christian sort of mysticism, and the film ends with a quote from the book of John that talks about the origins of people through the elements, which is a very strange concept, but it's something that recurs in Eastern religions, in Kabbalism and so forth, and they all share the same concept of the origins of man coming from the earth, the ground. And that's why when I dress her in green and floral patterns. I put her in grass, like she's just sort of risen and up, and it's just little superficial things. But yeah, there is, you know, conceptually, there is a lot of that there. And you know, it started back with the whole Pygmalion. You know, we can go to the New Testament jars of clay, and it's the same recurrent concept that comes through. Yeah. Yeah. No, it's just to obscure herself, to hide herself. Because even the spacesuit is like a second skin, right? These are things that she kind of protects herself from. It's just a matter of making herself anonymous and unremarkable, and not having an obscured identity, like even less of an identity than she did as someone growing up. I think we'll take a few more questions, and we'll probably call it a wrap.
Question, anyone? Because all right, well, so Otto and I have actually had this conversation. This isn't directly about the film, but you know, obviously it's a beautiful film. But going back more to the theme of producing a film like this, exhibiting a film like this, any hope that one might have to distribute or reclaim your costs. We've had, he touched upon this a moment ago, where he said that the internet and modern distribution systems are kind of breaking down what the classic independent film system, and we've had this discussion. So, but I'm gonna make Otto comment on it. Now, we kind of have mildly divergent views on that, and where I have a view that that it's the next step where what that will do, it'll break down the kind of classic age of cinema and allow for a new age where people will figure out what to do with the cheaper modes of production, you know, which we both agree will denigrate some aspects of film to a lower level, but also allow for people like yourselves and ourselves to independently produce and release films with no hope or view of having any financial recompense. And that was just something that I was interested in having Otto, who obviously has a more invested view on it, comment upon and say, you know, I'm personally interested and hopeful of what new developing forms might come from that. And I'm interested in having Otto comment to you about what his view on that may be.
Yeah, I think it's, I mean, there's one thing I take exception to what you're saying. You're, in the short term, recouping is a challenge, but you look at it as an investment, a loss leader towards the future. You have to. I mean, that's the sort of thing that otherwise it doesn't make sense to continue working unless you're willing to make that sacrifice. That is the way I look at it, because I'm not an optimist, but I actually have a private confidence that if I continue, it'll happen. And it'll happen, maybe it'll happen too late where I won't be able to enjoy it as readily, but it will, to continue working. But I think it's a key question is why we're here at MOCAD as opposed to being at the main art or trying to get into the AMC and do it. And I think this is the environment and context for the future of filmmakers who aren't going to try to compete on the terms of those commercial products. You know, making a film based upon the commercial success formula is like chasing a caboose. That's long over the horizon. So I'm just going to do something that's going to be a little more involved with the intellect, a little bit more involved with aesthetics, in working environments like this, and just build on this. You know, we started here. We have a nice, it's a small but appreciative audience, and that's the sort of thing. Only in this environment can I expect to find those people, right? My joke last night was we had 150 people here. It was a free film, and not one person walked out, which that's very flattering. You know what I mean? You know, when you have nothing invested but time. And people sort of kind of stuck to that investment. And that's why I think for your model, to answer you, is to produce work that's very, you know, reasonable in its sort of budget and expenditures, but to also go out to an audience that is most likely to support you and continue your practice. And that's why when you look in the commercial film industry, most of the filmmakers only make one film. And if they don't turn, you know, if it's not black ink, if it's red ink on it, they'll never make a film again. Well, why would I make myself beholden to that industry and stop working based on that? So I'll do it this way, and then we'll do it again in 3 years, and maybe it'll be, you know, a bigger sort of occasion, and you know that's the sort of thing you have to work on. Or maybe we'll go up to the DFT, and I mean that's the thing, you work in that direction. But that's what it is. It's an investment, Ben. It is an investment, and you know if you're up to it, you do it. If you're serious, you make that investment.
I don't know if anybody understands generally the film festival circuit, but often people actually have to pay to exhibit in those exhibitions. And if you do win, so the audience prizes usually are a tiny fraction of what your actual output was. Yeah. And then there's vehicles like Netflix or something, which their system actually pays you a flat fee to exhibit your work for an extended period of time, which for a lot of people who exhibiting in the same form in this kind of environment means that half their audience will be degenerated by that by having the ability to watch the film for free. And the flat fees are anywhere from $20,000 to $60,000 for more independent films, and then the larger budget films don't break $100,000 for that. So even in your larger markets, you're still not looking for complete compensation for what you're doing. Personally, I think film will move more into the tiny window of your computer screen as time progresses.
And you'll be sustained based upon the advertising around that little tiny screen, which is kind of sacrilegious in some respect, right? But that's the model some people are perfectly comfortable with and whatnot, and I might end up there and I might have no choice.
Well, personally, I think I think in 10 years' time most things will move that way.
Yeah, exactly. Everything, the written word, film, music, everything that way.
So I just try not to have a problem with it.
All right.
Does anyone have any more questions? All right, well, I guess we'll wrap it up.
Yeah, I just wanted to make a few comments, reiterate my gratitude to the museum, to our sponsors, Ethan and Gretchen and Nora. With their support, this was made to be a free event, available to everybody, and to invest in turning this space into a nice viewing experience. And that cannot be overlooked or forgotten from my standpoint, because that's something that means a lot to me personally, from friends, and the audience as well. Like I was saying, investing themselves on a Sunday afternoon in something that who knew what they were getting into, other than the people who came back to see it again, and they stayed. And that's the sort of thing. But yeah, museum's been fantastic. I hope to be back eventually. I mean, sooner than later, with new work. And that's the next challenge. Is just to invest, put myself into that sort of regime sooner than later, while I can.
And I'd like to thank Otto and his crew for coming out from Canada each night to present this film.